Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Productions channel here at YouTube, and welcome to, of course, another Wednesday review. And today, well, when it comes to this band, if you haven't kept up with any of my Album of the Week episodes, and if you were to go back into my episodes, you can definitely see that I've covered 6 of this band's albums as Album of the Week episodes, and that should give you the indication how much this band is to my heart. They are dear to my heart. And finally, I get to review a new album from these guys. That, of course, is the 17th studio album from AC/DC. That is Power Up, which was released, of course, on November 13th of this year through, of course, Columbia Records. And oh man, when it comes to this album, when it comes to at least the history for this album, it was really up in the air whether or not if we're going to see this lineup of AC/DC, which of course had debuted on Rock or Bust, with of course, again with Stevie Young of course, the nephew of Angus and his late older brother Malcolm. He was the nephew of these two, and was also in a band called Starfighters back in the early 80s, which I've got a record with, of course, Starfighters on there. Again, whether or not we were going to see that, because again, given the whole hearing issues with Brian Johnson and the legal issues with Phil Rudd, and the fact that Cliff Williams had retired on the tour that Axl Rose was singing on, I guess in many ways, again, to replace Brian Johnson, for at least to fill out those tour dates. So it was really up in the air whether or not we were going to see this lineup again, but here we are, finally with this. And the thing when it comes to this album, since this was again in many ways is a tribute to Malcolm, since it was meant to be one, that also meant that Angus was going to go back into at least the vaults of unused, unfinished, unreleased material that him and his brother was working on prior to his death. So this, again, it definitely goes as far back to like Black Ice, and goes even as far back into the 1990s. And that's definitely with this album, you definitely get that. So with, again, in many ways, do I really have to really go as far along with this? But I should also point out this is also the 3rd album with, of course, Brendan O'Brien on the producer's chair. So without further ado, let's get into, of course, Power Up from AC/DC. So, before I really get into my thoughts on this album, let's do a track listing rundown. We got about 12 songs on here, and of course it all clocks in at 41 minutes and 3 seconds. That's pretty much a little longer than Rock or Bust, but much shorter than Black Ice, but shorter than Stiff Upper Lip, Ball Breaker, and The Razor's Edge. In many ways, it's almost on par with the length of like Blow Up a Video and some of the classic records from the Brian Johnson era, and also close to some of the length of even the Bon Scott era AC/DC records. So I think that's a plus on my book. So let's get to, before I really also get into more pluses as well, let's definitely start running down the songs here. So again, these 12 songs are, of course, Realize, Rejection, Shot in the Dark, no, not an Ozzy Osbourne song, Through the Mists of Time, Kick You When You're Down, Witch's Spell, Demon Fire, Wild Reputation, No Man's Land, Systems Down, Money Shot, and Code Red. So, when it comes to this album, I want to try and just run this briefly. again, this band was definitely one of those gateway bands. I mean, this band was definitely the soundtrack to my childhood, along with everybody else that has subscribed to my channel. I would definitely assume. I mean, anyone that grew up in the 1980s, these guys were a soundtrack to their youth. So when it came to that, again, there was just a point in my time period where I was also really heavily in AC/DC, and there was even a point in time where I almost kind of phased out at AC/DC for a little while there, and that definitely kind of rejuvenated when Rock or Bust was coming out. But not because of the record, but just because I hadn't heard those albums in a long time prior to that album. So I went back and ended up going back and just rekindled my love for a lot of those albums. But and that was definitely great. So I definitely should at least briefly go back, because when Black Ice first came out, I mean, prior to then, again, I remember my first introduction to AC/DC, I still feel, was Ball Breaker, because released on the same year as I was born. And I just remember some of those songs getting played in either the car or even in the house. So it definitely was engraved in my head for a long time. And then, of course, the first new album that was being released when I was a kid at that point was when I was starting to grow a little more, I guess, as a toddler, basically. Stiff Upper Lip was released, and the first time I ever saw them for the first time, really, as far as any real footage of them, was when they played on Saturday Night Live of that year, playing the title track from Stiff Upper Lip. That was the same one that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was hosting, and of course, that also falls into my line of "For My Love of Wrestling." Still, though, that was my first time, and again, through there, I was just a big fan. I just became an absolute fan of these guys, and there was even a point again when my brother had received Family Jewels, a DVD, that just even made it more, that just fueled more of my love, and to where it almost turned into AC/DC mayhem. I was like dressing up as Angus Young, air guitaring to everything of them. I just could not get enough of them. Really, it didn't matter what era it was. It just gave me a lot of jolt of fun and enjoyment, and I just loved it. And so, but of course, when I then finally heard Stiff Upper Lip, and I talked about this in my at least I'm the Week review for that album, I enjoyed it, but the thing is, I noticed that, I mean, compared to Ball Breaker, I felt because of Rick Rubin's production, best known for Slayer and Danzig, just like he did with some of the Danzig albums, he definitely gave as far as the production and tone of it, it didn't feel like the happy-go-lucky AC/DC. It was a little darker, almost a little more broodinger in some plays. It was a little, again, it felt like a darker AC/DC record. Even the lyrics, though, were still as tongue-in-cheek as any other AC/DC record, but it's just the feel of it was different, and it wasn't as fast. But I've come to somewhat appreciate that. But compared to Stiff Upper Lip, which wasn't as fast, a little more upbeat, I guess you can say, compared to Ball Breaker, but at the same time, it kind of, at first listen, besides a couple of 3 songs or 2, or at least, or a 4, at the period when I first heard it, I liked it, but not every song grabbed me, and I kind of felt it was a little kind of generic for some reason. It felt a little generic. But the thing is, that should have given the hint of the kind of mind frame they were going to get in terms of the energy. Because that's when it finally came to Black Ice. Now, when Black Ice came out, the fact, since at the time I was still a kid, and the thing is, I was still a big AC/DC fan, to find out that they were releasing a new album, and that one, and by that point, I was like almost a kid on Christmas. I just couldn't wait to get at least that new AC/DC record. So when it finally, on the release day, I got my dad to wake up to go to Walmart and get it. And when he came back, I was like a kid on Christmas morning. I put it on. At the time, I liked it. But then by the following year, it wore off. And every time by the time a Rock or Bust was coming out, and since I hadn't heard those AC/DC albums in a long time, I was just like, since it hadn't been so many years, I decided to go back, and once again, I ended up falling in love with them once again. So I just really, and the thing is, I knew which albums I really liked, but by the time after Ball Breaker, when getting into, of course, then re-listening to Black Ice, it just wasn't the same. It didn't feel like the same AC/DC. It felt tired. It felt, again, very old almost. Again, if it it sounded like how they looked at that point. And that's the thing that didn't thrill me, and I just wasn't. And I wasn't. Besides a couple or several songs on that album, the thing is also it just overstayed its welcome. 15 songs is too much for an album, and the time length that was too long for an AC/DC record. It just wasn't what it should have been. And so by the time Rocker Bus finally came out, and the thing is, prior to that, when I heard Play Ball, I just wanted to hear it once and I didn't want to hear it again. And so when I got the record, I put it on. It had to take me several lessons before I really got into that album. And now at that point, the thing is, it just wasn't that. It took me several lessons to finally get into it. And the thing is, for years though, I did say, well, at least this is better than Black Ice. But that was about it. It wasn't still. I wasn't saying, well, at least it's as good as any of this thing from the past. No, it wasn't. It just was like, it's good for a modern day AC/DC record, but it's not the best representation of what they were once in their prime. So it was just a so-so record. So at that point, I thought was like, I'm giving up a little bit on AC/DC, or at least anything new from them. Not in the way I felt like with bands like Def Leppard, where I was like, that's it. I'm sticking with 3 records. That's about it. When it comes to this band, I just was like, I might get it, but I'm probably not going to like it as much as anything they've done in the past. The ones that really made me fall in love with them. It wasn't going to be like that. So when news came out that, especially the picture in 2018, that out of the warehouse in Vancouver, Canada, of just seeing that picture and just seeing the guys, it was just like, because at this point, with all the issues and so on, it was kind of shocking to see that photo emerge on to the internet, because I gave you the hint, is there going to be a new AC/DC record? But still, I wasn't completely thrilled, even though it's shocking, but I wasn't like, well, who knows? It might turn out to be something. In the following year, nothing. And the same thing for the most part of this year. There was nothing. Then, of course, we got the teaser. We got the little banner teasers with, of course, the letters PWR, Lightning Bolt, Up. And of course, seeing the Columbia Records logo, it gave me like, so the album's going to be titled Power Up? And that's when we finally got the teaser, Shot in the Dark. And the thing is, while it sounded like the modern era of AC/DC, but I noticed something was creeping there that I had never heard, that finally I hadn't heard in a long time. I felt like I was hearing an old friend again, because the energy that they were playing at was just, it sounded more upbeat, way more upbeat compared to some of the previous albums. I mean, a lot more. And that's the thing, I was like, could this turn this? Is this going to be a AC/DC record that I'm going to put on more often? Is this going to be the first one? Then finally, I read the Rolling Stone interview with a lot of the band members. That got me and gave you the insight. What was the mind frame of going into this album? The mindset was basically to make a tribute album to Malcolm. And also by doing so was going back into the vaults and finding and trying re-listening and trying to really finish a lot of the material that him and his brother were tried working on that didn't get the finish. So finally all of it has been kind of, this time they finished it. They finally got these songs finally out. But then I got the taste from the song titles. Again, like for one that stood out at me was Witch's Spell and Demon Fire. I'm like, this could turn into something. And then I get the 53-second video for Demon Fire, and I was like, well, this sounds pretty good. This is turning into something. I might really like this. And then, of course, again, a few months later, they finally, towards the album release, I've read some of the reviews, and I was like, it just added to the excitement of me waiting for this album. I just was like, maybe this is gonna be good. I can't wait to check this out. And I finally couldn't believe I was saying these words and thinking this. I couldn't believe it. So finally, then when they started to release the song for Realize, that's when that was it. I was like, I want to hear the rest of this album. I just couldn't. And for the energy of that song, it just felt like the old days. It felt like the best years of the Brian Johnson era, in my opinion. It took me back to the past to like flick the switch and fly on the wall and all that. It took me back to that. And Brian Johnson is sounding absolutely fantastic on there. He had sound that's great. I don't know, maybe I guess him sadly losing his hearing and then finally getting it, miraculously getting it back due to, of course, the help of a AC/DC fan who was creating technology to fix the hearing for Brian Johnson. It made him as just more excited, more like how we did in the 1980s. And and you really could feel that in a song like Realize, and even in Shot in the Dark, you can feel that. He just absolutely sounds fantastic. It sounds like, again, probably the best he has sounded since The Razor's Edge. And that's where I felt that this is finally going to be the AC/DC record that I'm going to come back to over the years when I'm in that mood. And finally getting the album in and listening to it, I can for sure tell you, this right here is the AC/DC album I wanted to hear since really becoming one of the biggest fans of these guys, for sure. And albums like Black Ice and Stiff Upper Lip and Rock or Bust were a lot to be desired. This is them back. So let's finally get into, of course, Power Up. Oh my God. I mean, yes, it's AC/DC. It's typical, but this is at least the AC/DC that I come to remember. This is one that gave me those enjoyment through my childhood. This is the same AC/DC from the real guys, basically, just minus Malcolm Young. But you can feel him. You really can. You can feel at least Malcolm Young's presence on these songs. He's definitely here. Just, again, in ghostly spirit, and at times it tends to be haunting, but it's also an enjoyous listen. I mean, it's just the opening stuff of like Realize, to then of course stuff like Demon Fire, and even of course Systems Down and Money Shot, and some of these songs. It's just, this is the AC/DC that I like. And again, I like Shot in the Dark. I think that's a catchy as shit song. It's such a fun chorus to it. Just every bit of the fire. They're just playing at the conviction. Phil Rudd, even, I think that this is by far his best performance since for albums like, again, Back in Black, For Those About to Rock, and Flick of the Switch, which is the final album he played on before leaving the band, and him then finally coming back, of course, in around the Ball Breaker time period. But when he came back, I felt like, well, it was not bad. But compared to how he was in the past, it felt geriatric. Here, he actually sounds like he's actually enjoying himself, and that's where I think you really get with stuff again. And I will definitely elaborate more on like songs like Through the Mists of Time and Kick You When You're Down. But a lot of these songs, especially listen like Rejection, he's just is playing at a speed. He's doing some stuff he hasn't done in a long time, and you guys can just feel that in his performance on this album. Everyone, Cliff Williams, for a guy who was just who retired from the band, came back in. He's really up front with this sound. He's literally playing at a top shape on this sound. Everyone is. This is definitely, Stevie Young, he's definitely, I think, for the role to fill, for his late, Malcolm, I think he does great. I think this is at least a good enough break. I think I actually accept this more than, let's say, I guess you could say, Wolfgang Van Halen, I guess, in Van Halen. Still, though, let's definitely get into my thoughts on, especially the song we're listening for Power Up. Just each and every song, just to go through these. Realize, good lord. It's a sharp opener that recalls the days of Flick of the Switch and Fly on the Wall. It's a rockin' song, played with conviction. They just sound like they are better than ever. For guys at their age, it's surprising that they were able to get some of this out. Then, of course, Rejection. It's a heavy, down and dirty strut with lyrics that spits out venom. It's a fun song, as a matter of fact. As I can also say, a FU song, as a matter of fact. Not what I meant to say, because if you listen to the lyrics, I know everyone is starting to interpret it as kind of being a I guess you could say a little bit of almost a violent sexual kind of song, but I don't really get that. I almost take this like it's pent up aggression for all the years that they were penned as a band, from either the Satanic Panic in the past to everyone who didn't get what they were about and slagged them, even the Rolling Stone who didn't get AC/DC at first. This is probably in many ways, even could say this was Malcolm Young's his response to every one of them. It's a big middle finger to every bit of those people that talk down to this band. They've definitely, it's a lot of angst, and it sounds like this also could have been on like For Those About to Rock next to songs like Inject the Venom and so on. It's definitely a great track too. And of course, Shot in the Dark. This track is a fun-filled song with hooks and is so damn catchy and fun. It's a good song. Through the Mists of Time. This one's interesting. This one, at first listen, it took me by surprise. It really did. I mean, I've read the reviews, but I was like, you know, how can't be much of a surprise compared to some of the more tamer, more sore songs I've been doing for the past couple of years. How different can it be? Well then, finally listening to this song for the first time when I put it on, it really kind of it definitely reached out at me in a way that I never would have expected. And it was that, at first I'm like, this is different. What is with this song? Again, I would expect this kind of song from AC/DC. It's a very calm, very melodic, and at times almost close to being almost what their idea of a 80s power ballad would be, but done the AC/DC way without adding any acoustic guitar parts. It's very commercial sounding. Again, it's very commercial sounding with a lot of the layered backing vocals and so on. It just sounds so different compared. This is the kind of stuff I would expect from other Australian bands like the Angels, for example. Even at times the more commercial material from Rose Tattoo in the 1980s. This is something I would have expected from them, but not AC/DC. Given a band how hard-edged that they really are. And this is a very much a hard-edged rock record from front to back. But this song is just so different. But again, with each listens, it grew into me. I end up loving this song very much. This to me is for sure, I think, definitely one of the most interesting moments on the album. And I don't know if I can say it might be my favorite song, but it's just great, and the lyrics, there is some deep meanings to it. In many ways, it's almost the band reminiscing on the past, whether it be the good days and the bad days. This is basically the band basically reminiscing. Again, just like a bunch of guys at the pub drinking and just singing along. That's the kind of feel, and it's joyous, it's upbeat, but it's great. And Phil Rudd is doing some interesting stuff I would never heard him do in some ways. He's playing at a speed that he normally doesn't, and he's doing some interesting drumming. And I think, again, it heightens the song. And again, Brian Johnson, I think he owns this song for sure. He really makes this, and Angus Young with his guitar solo, it's great. To say, though, that this is the first ballad that they've came up with, no, it is not. For me, I hate to use the word, because right now, with the whole political situation and who seems to me this word is synonymous with, I don't think nobody wants to hear this from me, but I'm going to say it. That's fake news. To say that this is the first ballad, no. You gotta go all the way back to the original Australian pressing of High Voltage. The first ballad they ever did was a song called Love Song, ironically enough. But it was also originally written by Dave Evans, the original singer. And that's the first ballad AC/DC ever written, and that was the last one they ever did. I guess come to 2020, here we got Through the Mists of Time. But it's not a typical ballad, but it's a pretty good, upbeat, almost rock and kind of power ballad. Something you might expect from Def Leppard almost, but it's done in a way that is very AC/DC. And if this was a power ballad from Def Leppard, and with the lyrics, who knows? This would have been probably a much better power ballad than anything they've done since maybe Pyromania. But I don't want to try and compare this, because I think this is much better than anything. And again, it's very down to earth, and it's very genuine. It's a good song, I would say, from AC/DC. Again, it shows that they can do some good, deep, very genuine, melodic, calm, ballady kind of stuff. They can do that. It shows they can do that for sure, and they do a good job of it. It's a good song. Next up is Kick You When You're Down. This is another one that had to take me a few listens to get into, because, I mean, the way it starts out, again, it starts out something like you expect from, like, the Razor's Edge. But when it finally goes into the song, it almost feels a little different. But as the song by each listen, I start to get more of that Razor's Edge feel. It's definitely... It shows their influence for a lot of the 60s rock bands, like the Rolling Stones, like The Who, and some of that. It shows their influence on those kind of bands. I mean, you can also compare this to maybe the very first Aerosmith record, but it's played by AC/DC, and it's done the AC/DC treatment, and it's a good song. I've come to enjoy it, but it's not my favorite on the record. But again, I don't hate this song. I actually dig it. I think Brian Johnson sounds pretty good. The thing, we go back to the layered vocals, the layered backing vocals for this, which with like, oh no, and so on. It's weird. That's the thing. It just throws me off. But in many ways, it's a little challenging to me. But with each listen, I've come to almost now like it. It's something that I liked and I don't hate. It's different. It's upbeat, but it's good. And of course, we got some interesting fills from Phil Rudd that he hasn't done since Power Edge. Think like What's Next to the Moon with the drum fills on that. He's finally doing some of that, which again began with something like for sure Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, which again wasn't the normal kind of drum beat from you expect these days from AC/DC. So it's great. It's a bit of a change of pace. I like it. It's something I will at least accept. So there you go. Then, of course, on the words is Witch's Spell, which, again, this could have fit on any of the 80s AC/DC records. It's got a little bit almost somewhere between Sink the Pink and Who Made Who. It would have been, if Who Made Who was its own record instead of a soundtrack compilation record, this would have fit right in with some of those songs, especially next to like Who Made Who. It's definitely a very cool song. Though again, probably not my favorite, but it's taken me time to really get into it, and I'm appreciating more of it. It's a good song for what it is. So I like Witch's Spell. That's when for me, when I first heard it, this is where, to me, I felt the album picks up. But now I think I like the album as a whole. But this is where the album really gets back to being a straight up hard edge rock and roll record. Demon Fire. This song is a smoking rocker. That definitely sounds like if a Ball Breaker era song was recorded in the 80s for like Flick of the Switch. Oh my god, this is a good song. It definitely recalls the glory days of AC/DC for me. That chorus and so on. Brian Johnson sounds amazing. Everyone on here. This is a classic AC/DC sounding song. I love it. And of course, Wild Reputation. It's another catchy song that again could have fit on Fly on the Wall because it has those vibes. It's a good song. Shorter. It's a shorter song on the album, but it's a good shorter song and it doesn't overstay its welcome. Though I probably would have liked a little bit more minutes on it, but it's a good song. No Man's Land. This right here sounds like the bastard love child of Badlands off of Flick of the Switch and Stand Up off Fly on the Wall. Though it doesn't have the chorus of Stand Up, but it just has that almost down dirty, almost outlawish kind of beat that you kind of got with that. And it's just great. This would have been great for a good, almost Western style action film. I really liked it. This would work good. It's, again, just a good song. Could have fit on any of those two albums, in my opinion. Just a good song. Then we get Systems Down. Another fun, mid-tempo hard rocker that it's just absolutely catchy. Could have also been on, like, maybe the Razor's Edge at times. Or a crossbreed between the Razor's Edge and Fly on the Wall. Just a good song, and I like it. And Brian Johnson sounds great on here. Money Shot. This right here recalls the raunchier days of for sure of AC/DC. It's a throwback to the raunchier years. But this is such a fun rocker that is backed by a infectious chorus that is sung with conviction. I really dig this song. And finally, we get Code Red, which this is a much better album closer than compared to Emission Control off of Rocker Bus, which is still probably my most least favorite song off of Rocker Bus, if you were to ask me. It just sounded so generic in many ways. Here, though, this one's got some great vibes. It's a foot pounding, mean, heavy blues number with riffs heavy enough to be a anvil that is falling onto a Mount Everest. Basically enough to be an anvil to fall onto and crush a mountain. Just mountains with this song. Just plenty of heavy riffs. And it's a good song. And it's a good way to end the album. So there you go. There is, of course, Power Up from, of course, AC/DC. And now for my rating, I am gonna get a little pretentious with you. I know I'm not supposed to give this high enough score. I'm not supposed to. But when it comes to just judging off of playback quality, I'm gonna give it this. I'm giving it a 9.20 out of 10. It's not 100. It definitely isn't. But as far as playback quality, which is the one thing I complained a lot about some of the more recent AC/DC records, this finally has the playback quality that I'm finally longed for. I can go back and listen to this, especially when it comes to even scratching a lot of that itch that some of those past couple of albums weren't doing for me. This finally scratches a lot of that itch, and it's a good one to scratch that itch, especially coming off of listening to albums like Flick of the Switch, Fly on the Wall, and at times maybe for those about to rock, and Blow Up Your Video, and The Razor's Edge, and of course some of those. I can go into this and pull this one out and it would fit right in. This is just a good, solid AC/DC record that I'm happy to at least in some ways praise. I'm finally happy to put on an AC/DC record that sounds like AC/DC to me, with Brian Johnson sounding as good as he's ever has sounded since The Razor's Edge. He sounds fantastic. Every one of these guys were sounding great. So this is a good return to form, which is something I never would have expected for AC/DC. With any other band, you can do that way, like Judas Priest, Megadeth, and so on. You can expect to use the term return to form. But for AC/DC, it's weird to use that term, but here we are. This was Power Up. So there's my review. Long, but I hope you get the gist of my review. Because again, it's a journey. It's a journey for me, and I'm happy to. Even for a young person as me, I'm just so thrilled to just hear AC/DC. So with that, for sure, this album has been released since November 13th. I know there's going to be various different opinions. But again, if you have any thoughts on this album, let me know in the comments section before. But if you had heard this album, you may not think this is going to be, anything new. It really isn't. But if you really enjoy the classic AC/DC stuff of the 1980s, I'm not going to go as far back to the Bon Scott years, because we know it will probably never live up to the quality of the Bon Scott era material, and that should be noted. But if you want a good AC/DC record that you to throw on and basically air guitar to, bang your head and so on, and just drive on the road, basically just something that's driving, I think this is a good album to do so. It's a fun record. So with that, I hope you all enjoyed. This is Heavy Thrash. I say I'm out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone, and well, power up.